Qin Tian and his team soon reached the area where they expected the enemy troops to arrive. They began preparing for an ambush after hearing about Shadak's defeat, knowing the Imperial army would soon march nearby. Securing Kate's territory was the same as securing the relic that could help Qin Tian and the others return home. Qin Tian felt grateful to have Russell tracking the Imperial army's position, allowing them to adjust their ambush. This kept them from being too anxious while waiting. Soon after, they moved to set up the ambush at the predetermined location guided by Russell. This time, Qin Tian brought musketeers with him. Based on the information they had, the approaching Imperial force included 1,000 cavalry and knights, along with several artillery units. Even though he knew their numbers, Qin Tian was still surprised when he saw them with his own eyes. It was an extremely long column of thousands of soldiers, with only a few hundred entering the ambush zone. However, despite the enemy's large numbers and alertness, Qin Tian believed they could easily defeat the arrogant foes who had won battles so far. He knew the enemies were currently underestimating them. With Qin Tian's signal, the ambush team began firing their muskets at the Imperial troops, who quickly started falling. A general easily figured out where the ambush was coming from. Qin Tian then ordered the catapults to be fired, which immediately overwhelmed the enemies. He couldn't believe the catapults had such powerful impact. The surviving Imperial troops began begging for their lives. Noticing the enemy's morale dropping, Qin Tian ordered his men to capture them. Qin Tian was surprised it only took 10 minutes, and the counterattack they expected never happened as the enemy cavalry fled instead. After dealing with the Imperial vanguard, Qin Tian and the others headed toward Wafi city, not to support Daquir, but to cut off the Imperial army's retreat. Their main plan was to infiltrate the enemy's supply base and disrupt their logistics. That way, Daquir and Shadak would be able to escape the siege and close the gap in the battle line. A few days later, the snowy weather in the kingdom continued ever since it had started during the last ambush. Because of the snow, what should have been a 2-day journey to Wafi city took much longer. Qin Tian and the others had to stop and rest frequently to avoid frostbite. In the end, it took them 5 days to reach their destination, which was near the Imperial army camps surrounding Wafi city. Qin Tian instructed Kate to tell everyone to find a place to rest. However, Kate was anxious since the enemy troops were close by. Gossen pointed out that the weather made it hard to see, and rushing could lead to danger. Qin Tian agreed and said the same likely applied to the enemies. There might be small patrols, but they could easily avoid them. The area around Wafi city didn't have hills or ravines, so they had no choice but to pitch tents to protect themselves from the cold wind and snow. Thanks to the blizzard, the smoke from their campfires went undetected by the enemy. They needed to cook a lot to gain energy in such extreme weather. Palmuka mentioned that the blizzard wouldn't stop anytime soon. Kate wondered if they should move forward soon. Qin Tian suggested that it was better to do some reconnaissance while the weather was like this. Gossen asked if Qin Tian was trying to use the blizzard to scout the enemy. Qin Tian said it was a great opportunity, then Bokuma offered to go with him. Qin Tian and Bokuma traveled through the snowy terrain using sleighs. As they approached the enemy camps, they noticed how many there were and realized the city was heavily under siege. Tens of thousands of enemy troops were scattered around the city, and if any position faced trouble, nearby camps could quickly provide support through the shortest routes. Suddenly, the snow stopped, and Qin Tian told Bokuma to get down. They hid just in time as a small patrol group from the Imperial army passed by. From what Qin Tian observed, the enemy forces numbered over 60,000. Their earlier ambush had succeeded despite being outnumbered 10-1, because they had the advantage of the terrain and the element of surprise. However, if they faced the enemy head-on, they had no chance of winning since the enemies were humans who could dodge and move. Qin Tian and Bokuma decided to retreat, especially since there was no blizzard to cover their tracks. After they returned, Qin Tian led their troops several kilometers away and relied on Russell to find the locations of the enemy supplies. However, Qin Tian miscalculated something. Russell was just a bird and could only relay the locations of enemies without distinguishing who the officers were or where the military supplies were kept. The original plan to cut off the enemy's logistics failed. Everyone had a meeting, and Kate suggested blending in with the enemy troops since no soldier would have remembered every face in the Imperial army. However, Gossen pointed out that their accents and habits could reveal their identities. Kate then suggested acting like an injured soldier, but Gossen argued that a doctor would definitely check them. Qin Tian thought the strategy of pretending to be an injured soldier was good since it might lead to finding the enemy's military supplies. Kate felt sad, believing he wasn't being helpful to the team at all. Meanwhile, in the besieged fort of Trem, nobles held a meeting. They only knew that the Imperial troops weren't moving at all. Their food supply would only last for a week, so the Duke decided to reduce the civilians' food supply again. Dequir asked for any good ideas, but Shadak admitted he couldn't think of any solution to their situation. Just then, explosions occurred outside the fort. The other nobles panicked as the explosions continued, assuming they were caused by the Imperial troops. Dequir told them not to worry since the explosions sounded far from the fort, but he still instructed them to be ready for battle. Dequir and Shadak went outside and asked the soldiers on duty what had caused the explosions, but no one knew what had happened. Dequir got angry because the explosions were loud and could be seen from afar. The frightened guard explained that they really didn't know what had happened, only that the explosions had occurred in the enemy camps. Dequir angrily asked if the soldier was certain. The soldier pointed toward the direction of the Imperial troops' camps and repeated that it had really happened there. Dequir wondered if the enemy had received reinforcements, but doubted it since, if that were the case, it should have been noisier outside. Curious and anxious about the explosions, he ordered the night watch to be doubled, and for all legions to be ready for battle at any moment. Despite not knowing what had caused the explosions, Dequir knew that this unexpected situation had changed the course of the battle. He also assumed it might be a trick by the enemy, and ordered that they remain on guard at all times from all directions. Soon after, the soldier who reported earlier privately informed Shadak that their supplies had been destroyed. Angered, Shadak asked if the kingdom's reinforcements had really arrived, but it seemed impossible because, based on the report, they should still have been on their way. If the reinforcements had truly arrived, they could have easily breached the area and destroyed the supplies. The soldier admitted he didn't know what had happened. Shadak angrily asked if everyone thought it was the work of a ghost or something. The soldiers could only confirm that the explosions had happened suddenly and without warning. Shadak wanted an explanation, even if it was just a guess. The soldier then mentioned that it might not be related to the explosions, but before and after they occurred, an eagle or something similar had been circling and hovering around the camps. Upon hearing about the eagle, Shadak recalled a previous report about an eagle being spotted when they were in Moso City. The soldier wondered if it was the same eagle they had failed to take down before. Shadak decided to forget about the eagle for now, and wanted to know first how much they had lost in the explosions. The soldier then handed over a blood-stained document that listed the losses, which turned out to be severe. It was also reported that the army sent by the royal family had encountered an ambush by an unknown military force, suffering heavy casualties. Only 3,000 soldiers survived. Shadak angrily told him to stop talking. He was furious that his plan had been disrupted. However, he decided to focus on the present, and, as planned, put pressure on the royal family, who would now struggle to gather enough forces quickly. He was certain they would use their power. If everything went well, after repelling the Imperial forces, the royal army would move forward to support Dequir. Then, if his personal forces attacked from both sides, even the royal army would not be able to withstand the assault. However, the defeat of his advancing army had given the royal family enough time to mobilize troops from various places, and they would no longer need to use their power. What concerned Shadak more was the army that had ambushed the assault troops, whether they were knights of the kingdom or the royal army itself. He then ordered the soldier to inform the others about the change in plans, and to prepare for a strong attack on Wafi City within the next 2 days. His efforts, which had taken a long time, should not be wasted. Meanwhile, Russell returned to Qin Tian's camp, and after being illuminated by the torchlight, Qin Tian and the others discovered that Russell had been injured by an arrow. Bokuma immediately recognized the type of wound. Qin Tian was surprised that someone could shoot Russell while it was flying at a high altitude, especially during the night. Imagining this, Qin Tian patted Russell and asked it to rest for now. At that moment, a loud explosion occurred nearby. Kate panicked and asked what had happened. Bokuma wondered if the explosion she had heard was a hallucination, but Qin Tian said it was impossible since they had all heard it. The explosions continued, and Qin Tian instructed them to evacuate the area immediately. He told Gossen to take the others as far away as possible. He then left Russell in Oshbel's care and asked her to leave marks along the way. He also told Bokuma to grab her snowboard, and they would go check the situation. Qin Tian soon discovered that the Imperial army had started launching attacks on Wafi City, even after their supplies had been destroyed. The mixed noises of explosions and warriors clashing were loud enough to wake the dead. In a battle of this scale, death was inevitable. Just then, the Imperial troops brought out their huge siege engine. It was tall enough to scale Wafi City's walls, allowing the Imperial troops to climb from the bottom straight up to the sky bridge on top using the internal staircases of the siege engine. It was basically a movable ladder that could be used to infiltrate walls like those of Wafi City. Falkema then told him to check the sides, and the Imperial troops brought out their big guns. When Qin Tian saw that the Imperial troops also had artillery, he assumed that Wafi City wouldn't be able to hold out. Because of the heavy artillery, the first part of Wafi City's wall quickly crumbled to the ground. He wondered if Duke de Queer could hold the line. If Wafi City fell, it would mean the entire front of the kingdom would collapse quickly. When he saw the Imperial army rushing into the city, Bakuma asked what they should do. Qin Tian suggested they continue standing guard since they couldn't do anything but pray for their allies. Soon after, the Imperial troops started retreating out of the city. Qin Tian was glad that their side was winning and that Duke de Queer had held the line. As long as Wafi City wasn't breached, they could always refill the front line gaps. Qin Tian didn't really care much as long as the fighting didn't spread too much throughout the kingdom, and suggested they focus on their own matters now. After seeing the Imperial army defeated, Qin Tian decided to watch a little longer, and then share the news with the others. Inside Wafi City, Duke de Queer ordered his men to search for the injured Imperial troops hiding in the city and take care of them properly. To be honest, he was ready to escape on his own after seeing the city gates breached. He didn't expect that they could hold out, and he felt so relieved. Shadak then regrouped with him and reported that he was fine but needed some time to recover. De Queer thanked him for his support, saying that without it, he would be dead by now. Shadak replied that it was nothing to worry about, but mentioned that they wouldn't have struggled so much if they were stronger. De Queer insisted that Shadak and his troops had played a crucial role in the battle, and promised to commend his efforts to the king and suggest promoting him to a ducal status. Shadak said that it was all for the protection of the kingdom. However, in his mind, he was celebrating because he had finally gotten the title and position he always wanted. The cleanup work on the battlefield took 2 days, and by the third day, Wafi City returned to normal. The royal army troops finally arrived. Since they had already reached the front lines, Kate and the others no longer faced threats from the Empire, and were able to return to Moso City. However, to avoid facing the same crisis again, Qin Tian suggested that Kate spend a significant amount of resources to strengthen the city walls. The temporarily assembled militia was not disbanded. Instead, their training intensity increased. After Moso City was temporarily secured, Qin Tian and the others finally found time to search for the ruins using Dumbledore's map. During that era, technology was limited, and maps weren't drawn accurately. The map in Qin Tian's possession was even more basic, and only showed the terrain around the ruins as a reference for finding them. The group soon arrived at the approximate location of the ruins based on the map. Gossin noticed a strange patch of land where no weeds were growing. It looked like it had been recently covered with soil. Kate wondered if the entrance might be underground, and Oshbel suggested digging to find out. Qin Tian pointed out that it would take time, considering the size. He recommended setting up camp first, since it was going to get dark soon. That night, everyone set up camp and surrounded themselves with tents to block the wind. Without any entertainment, they could only gather, chat, or sleep. Soon, everyone fell asleep, feeling sluggish due to the cold weather. Qin Tian and Ye Lin were still awake. Ye Lin felt disappointed because the ring was broken, and they couldn't use it to check if there was a lab below them. Qin Tian reassured her not to worry, saying they would find out soon. He hoped they would discover something that could help them open the main door to the lab, if it really was in the reported ruins. There was also a chance it could be opened manually, just like Yiqiu had done before. Qin Tian thought there might be people inside who wouldn't let them in, but he couldn't hear anything from above ground. Ye Lin assumed that Dumbledore had managed to get inside since he had retrieved the bracelet as a spoil. However, she knew they could just search slowly, as they had done for years together. Ye Lin felt glad that they had reunited and that everyone was doing well. Qin Tian realized that since they had arrived in this unknown world, they had been trying every possible way to find a way back to where they came from. However, they had overlooked the people around them who loved them. There wasn't much more that Qin Tian could have wished for. Throughout history, those who had gone through war always wished for peace and prosperity. Even though he had power far beyond that of an ordinary person, in war, being able to protect oneself was more than enough. He closed his eyes, hugged Ye Lin, and wished for the war to end. The next morning, Qin Tian started digging into the ground, and they worked for half the day until someone reported a discovery. They found wooden boards, and Qin Tian was glad they had dug in the right spot. After uncovering most of the earth, a wooden door appeared. Qin Tian ordered Gossin to open it. They then discovered a spiral staircase made of stone. Qin Tian noticed how worn and uneven the steps were, and wondered if they had deteriorated over time, or if they were always like that. Oshbel claimed it wasn't made a long time ago, based on the erosion and carvings. Qin Tian felt disappointed that it wasn't a lab, but Ye Lin assured him they might still find some clues. Oshbel got excited at the thought of finding treasure, but Kate reminded her that Dumbledore had already visited the place. Qin Tian bravely went inside first and noticed there was oxygen inside, despite the musty smell. He led the way, and they all saw lights on the walls. Qin Tian realized that the candle-like things were actually made of whale oil. They were surprised by how the interior was sophisticatedly built with stone slabs. Yelin wondered what the place was for, and Qin Tian hoped it wasn't a tomb. Despite his prayers, they all discovered remains. Qin Tian told them to stay behind while he and Bokuma moved forward, staying on high alert. Gossen noticed that the remains belonged to one of Dumbledore's men, based on the clothing it wore. Qin Tian then told the others to proceed with caution, warning that there might be traps around. As they continued, they noticed more remains. They were relieved that Dumbledore's men had found the place before them, triggering some of the traps in the process. However, Qin Tian still warned them to be careful, as there might be traps that hadn't been triggered yet. Qin Tian got distracted by some armor lying on the ground and accidentally triggered something that made a noise. Something then came out from the walls, causing Qin Tian to scream in surprise. Qin Tian quickly slashed the arrows aimed at him, breaking them before they could hit. Yelin ran to him looking worried, almost like a concerned wife. Qin Tian reassured her that he was fine. Fortunately, there weren't many arrows, because even with his fast reflexes, he wouldn't have survived the trap if there had been more. He then decided to go ahead alone to trigger any traps along the way, while the others stayed behind. Considering the distance they had already covered, Qin Tian guessed that the end wasn't far off. At the end of the hallway, he saw more remains and noticed the siege logs. He figured that the logs had killed them, which seemed even more brutal than the arrows. Seeing these kinds of traps made Qin Tian realize that they were like something out of a tomb raiding novel. He just hoped there wouldn't be any magical traps later on, but he didn't dwell on it too much, since those only happened in movies and TV shows. Yilin and the others caught up and discovered the siege trap. Qin Tian suggested that only he, Gossen, and Nick should scout ahead, as it would be hard to keep everyone safe. Ashbel reminded them to move safely. The three continued until they came across another pile of remains. Qin Tian guessed there were more traps ahead. He told the others to follow closely after he triggered them. Gossen suggested they walk along the wall as they moved, in case there were secondary traps like flying logs. Nick warned them to be careful. Qin Tian and Gossen proceeded, triggering some traps along the way. Once the area was safe, he loudly called the others to join them at the end of the hallway. The group soon entered a room that resembled a throne room with scattered remains. Qin Tian also found a bed along with some supply bags and boxes, which suggested that someone had been living there. He quickly realized that the place was designed for one person and was not intended to be a resting place for the dead. Bokuma wondered what kind of person would choose to live in such a place, while Gossen insisted that it was a good spot to hide. Qin Tian then told the others to return to the corridors while he scouted the area, planning to have them come back later. He was disappointed to find that what he had believed to be a relic was actually just a hideout. He assumed there might be more dangers inside. The others waited patiently outside the door. Qin Tian used his super speed to run around and check for traps twice, but he found nothing. He felt relieved that all the traps in the area were no longer functional, and considered the place safe. Bokuma noticed that the remains had been there for a long time and were no longer recognizable. However, Washbel recognized the marks on the bodies and claimed they were from the royal guards who served the royal family directly. Qin Tian was surprised to learn that, aside from Dumbledore, the royal family's soldiers were also in the area, and someone had the audacity to kill them. He noticed that the breastplates were thick enough to block arrows, yet the killer had been strong enough to stab the soldiers with a sword and kill them easily. Bokuma then assumed that the corpse without armor was the owner of the place, who had died at the same time as the soldiers. Qin Tian was surprised that the owner had managed to hold off the soldiers for as long as he did. Gossen then reminded them to search for treasures, but he doubted any were left since the royal guards had likely already raided the place. Qin Tian had completely forgotten their main goal. Everyone then searched the area. The place was smaller than they had expected, and there was really nothing left to find. Ashbel assumed that Dumbledore had already taken anything valuable from there. Qin Tian was dismayed to discover that there were no clues about the library or any written records at all. He wondered if the place had anything to do with the lab he was searching for. Everyone soon returned to their camp and gathered around the bonfire. They talked about their theories that either Dumbledore or the royal guards had taken the treasures. Since Dumbledore had the ring, they concluded it was him. They also believed that, based on the stored wheat in the warehouse, the royal guards and the owner had died together. Kate then mentioned how the royal guards had been gone for so long, and no one from the royal family had sent anyone to investigate. Gossen guessed that it might have been a secret mission to deal with the owner of the underground base, but they all ended up dying with him. Since no one returned, the royal family likely had no idea what had happened. Ashbel wondered how dangerous the owner must have been for the royal family to send their guards. Qin Tian and Lin listened quietly, while Nick had already fallen asleep. Gosson admitted that he didn't really know and was just guessing. Qin Tian hoped that the owner had kept a diary so they wouldn't leave empty-handed. Lin said it wasn't all bad since they at least had a lead. They remembered how, back on Treasure Island 2, it was through Salmonson's diary that they found the ring's location. Diaries, they thought, were as valuable as treasures. Nick then woke up and asked if they were going to head back now. Kate, Gosson, and Oshbel were surprised and asked in unison. Qin Tian said it was time for him to reunite with his friends. Since Kate had grown stronger, he no longer needed to worry about being affected by the war in the near future. Qin Tian had also run out of clues about the laboratories and needed to find a new place to search. Oshbel asked when they would be leaving, and Lin told Qin Tian to decide. Qin Tian said they would leave in a couple of days. A few days later in Moso City, everyone gathered at the city gates to say goodbye. Gosson told Qin Tian that he was always welcome in their city, and Kate wondered if they would meet again. Oshbel reminded Qin Tian that they still owed him money and asked him to come back to collect it. Riding on top of the carriage, Qin Tian said he would see them again in the future. Lin also invited them to visit Doranba anytime. Doranba was located in the northeast of the Sacred West Kingdom. The journey would take them half a month, and along the way they would pass through various fiefs. They soon reached the paths where signs pointing to Doranba appeared. Lin mentioned that after the sign they would be in her territory. She noticed that Russell seemed happy to be home too, and Bokuma was also glad. Lin said they would arrive in Doranba City in the afternoon at their current pace. Holding Lin's hand, Qin Tian then thanked her for conquering the kingdom for him. Compared to the south, Doranba City was at a high altitude, surrounded by many trees and mountains. Qin Tian saw the towering castles of Doranba from a distance. It looked just like the city he had first seen when he and Nick arrived on the continent. As soon as they entered the city gates, Qin Tian noticed how lively the place was. More lively than the other cities he had seen so far. Nick then noticed the castle ahead of them, and Lin introduced it as the Wolf Eagle Fort, named after Russell and the place where they would stay. Qin Tian remarked that it was a good name. Nick wondered if everyone was in the fort. Bokuma mentioned that the others would be outside in the grassland around this time. They soon went to the grassland, where the wolves and eagles were also present. The children came out to greet Lin and were relieved to know she was safe. Chantan had told Lin to wait inside the carriage because she planned to surprise everyone. Although Qin Tian tried to stop her, he eventually agreed to his wife's idea. The children then ran over to greet Lin, and soon everyone gathered around her. Qin Tian and Nick took this opportunity to slip behind the crowd. Qin Tian felt glad to see everyone so full of energy, and Nick noticed that everyone was just the same as before. However, they couldn't see Jessica and Kata around, as they were still on an expedition. The others agreed that since their master Qin Tian and Nick hadn't been found, they should continue waiting. But at that moment, everyone realized that Qin Tian and Nick had returned. The children were especially happy to see them back and in good health. That night, everyone celebrated the return of Qin Tian and Nick. Qin Tian noticed that the Lada tribe remained as hospitable as ever. Despite barely having time to rest after his return, he was pulled into a drinking table. However, this turned out to be the most comfortable meal Qin Tian had enjoyed in quite some time. Wandering alone with Nick had been depressing, and he was grateful to feel the warmth of being home again. Lin wondered if Qin Tian was thinking about something pleasant. Surprised by the question, Qin Tian asked if Lin was drunk. He said that just thinking of Lin being by his side made him happy, and he held her hand tightly. Lin told him to stop because everyone was watching. Qin Tian replied that everyone was drunk and decided to take Lin somewhere private. He easily lifted her and brought her to her bedroom. Qin Tian tried to riz his way up to Lin's heart and whole, but Lin claimed she was willing to do the deed, but her heart was not yet ready. Qin Tian then apologized for being hasty. He gave her a hug and advised her to rest, since they had a long journey. That morning, Qin Tian checked out the area and found that the entire Lada tribe was officially the city's soldiers, responsible only for guarding the Wolf Eagle Fort. The defense of Doranba City, however, was left to soldiers hired by Lin. Lin proudly shared that she could currently mobilize over 2,300 troops. These were divided into 2 artillery battalions with 400 men each, a knight battalion of 100, a cavalry of 300, and the rest were musketeers. Qin Tian realized that Lin already held power comparable to that of an earl. Lin then invited Qin Tian to check the plantation with her. Although Lin's power was impressive, with the kingdom now clashing with the empire in battles involving tens of thousands, a force of just a few thousand was still not enough. Lin showed Qin Tian the vegetables, fruits, and stored grain in the castle. If they were besieged and cut off from the outside world, they could hold out for at least a month. She also shared that they had set up an English language school to help their tribe members communicate with people from the Holy West Kingdom. Now, most of the tribe members had mastered English, so basic communication was no longer a problem. Next, Yelin led Qin Tian to a secret chamber that held rings and bracelets. Yelin giggled and asked if it gave a medieval feel, then she opened the door. 2 more paths appeared and Qin Tian asked where to go. Yelin explained that the left one was a trap, and the right path was the correct one. At the end of the right path, Qin Tian saw a treasure box that looked familiar, and wondered if it was the same one they had found in Summonsen's tent on Treasure Island 2. Yelin said it wasn't. However, the box contained just treasures, jewelry, and diamonds. Meanwhile, Yelin was removing bricks from the wall, and surprisingly, a hidden separate box was revealed behind them. Qin Tian was impressed by how confusing the hidden chambers of Wolf Eagle Fort were. Yelin then shared that Jessica had found the place by accident. Qin Tian thought they had built the secret chambers themselves. Yelin showed a ring and bracelet and explained that the fort had changed hands several times before her, so the location of the secret room had been forgotten over time. Qin Tian noticed that the bracelet was identical to the one Shadak had presented at Dequir's banquet, except it would have had more cracks if it had been salvaged from the seabed. The erosion from the seawater naturally made it much more fragmented compared to the one in the vault. Qin Tian tried to turn on the 2 devices, but nothing happened. Yelin explained that the ring had shut off and couldn't be reactivated. She attempted several times, but neither device responded. Despite these disappointing results, Qin Tian found the anomaly intriguing. However, with the ring's technology, he couldn't quite figure out how it worked. He then decided to use the D3 ring, even though it was offline and out of energy. As expected, nothing happened, and Qin Tian laughed it off. He remembered Yelin mentioning that a fisherman had found the bracelet in a sunken ship, and Yelin confirmed this. Qin Tian wondered if Yelin had visited the sunken ship herself. Yelin shared that she and Jessica had quickly joined the fishermen and went to the area where the ship had sunk. However, the water was too deep, and even with oxygen tanks, Keita and the others couldn't withstand the water pressure for long. Additionally, Jessica's flashlight had run out of battery a long time ago, making it difficult to search the entire ship without proper lighting. After a long time of searching without success, they all decided to give up. Qin Tian suggested they would make another attempt once they were better prepared. Since the failed search was due to a lack of equipment, Qin Tian believed that the remaining areas of the ship might hold clues related to the laboratory. First, he needed to develop suitable equipment for underwater operations. They also needed proper lighting because everything underwater would be pitch dark, and they might miss important clues. However, such a mission required a lot of preparation. Qin Tian then decided to leave the secret chamber for now and return the ring and bracelet to their hidden compartment. Qin Tian and Yelin visited the facilities where flintlock guns were being made to protect Wolf Eagle Fort. However, they realized it wasn't enough, so they decided they needed to upgrade the production line to revolvers, as it was the quickest way to strengthen their forces. Afterward, Qin Tian asked Yelin and Bokuma about what they were wearing. Yelin mentioned they might not get any rest if they suddenly appeared in the city. Bokuma noted that Yelin was well loved by the residents, and her appearance would likely cause a commotion. Nick wondered if they should also wear disguises, but Yelin reminded them that they were still strangers to the residents. Qin Tian and Nick soon noticed how lively the city remained even after nightfall. In most other cities, things would have quieted down by 8 o'clock, but Doranba was still bustling, especially around the night market. Nick caught the scent of something sweet, and Yelin guessed it was cream cake. Bokuma was happy to see that the city was still as vibrant as before. Qin Tian wondered if Yelin had spent a lot to keep the city alive at night, unlike other cities where only pubs and inns were noisy after dark. Yelin agreed, explaining that she had invested heavily, especially in opening the night market. Qin Tian recalled how Kate had mentioned that the city lord covered the lighting expenses, and most cities had only a few street lamps on at night. Even Duke Dequire only kept the lamps lit during the autumn and winter seasons. Qin Tian then asked Yelin about the early days of the night market. Yelin explained that in the beginning, only a few shops participated, most of them being part of the Daybreak Association. Despite this, the night market attracted many residents, encouraging other shops to open in the evening. This created a positive cycle. The more shops that opened, the more residents they attracted, and the more residents there were, the more shops were drawn in. Eventually, the night market grew, attracting merchants from other cities. They came to Doranba to set up their shops, which increased the city's income. After a year, the Daybreak Association recovered its initial lighting expenses, and the taxes from the shops were enough to cover the cost of lighting every evening. Even now, it continued to turn a profit. Qin Tian asked Yelin about her field of expertise again, but could only remember that it was something related to economics. Yelin responded with a cute nod. With the help of the commercial association, Yelin had quickly risen from commoner status to nobility. This was possible because of her exceptional skills. The night market had created a positive cycle, continuously attracting external investments and shops. If this continued, Yelin wouldn't need to put much effort into building the city of Doranba and could instead focus on good planning. The increasing number of incoming shops would eventually develop the city on their own. As Qin Tian wandered through the night market, he reminisced about his old world. The group soon arrived at the headquarters of the Daybreak Association. Yelin proudly explained how she had designed the store based on the concept of modern large-scale supermarkets. The store offered food, weapons, clothing, daily necessities, and other goods typically found in the market. This store model had attracted many customers, keeping the store constantly busy during business hours. Qin Tian noticed a couple happily shopping with their pushcart. Yelin also showed him something beyond general merchandise. They also sold luxury goods with high profit margins. Qin Tian was surprised to see many pieces of jewelry displayed in the store. Just then, a soldier informed Yelin that they had completely lost contact with Jessica. Yelin, shocked, asked if it was true. The soldier confirmed that they had lost contact over half a month ago. Worried, Yelin shared that Jessica had taken Kata and the others to search for Qin Tian overseas. According to their plan, they were supposed to return home this month. Qin Tian had learned about Nazer Island, which was still part of the Sacred West Kingdom. It was known as a large island with a harsh environment and no inhabitants. The island was entirely made of sand, lacking fresh water, and no one had ever seen the full extent of it. The furthest known point was only 30 kilometers. According to legend, a huge treasure was buried in the center of Nazer Island. However, over the years, most treasure hunters had ended up resting eternally in the depths of the desert, with very few returning alive. It had basically become a forbidden area, but Jessica had gone there for Qin Tian's sake. The reporting soldier pointed on the map to the place where they had originally landed on the island, and the point where Jessica had started her expedition. Seeing the scale on the map, Qin Tian noticed that there was a distance of several kilometers between the 2 points. Yelin asked if there was something special about the place. The soldier then reported that Jessica had visited several treasure hunters before heading to Nazer Island and had planned out the most optimal route. Also, before they set out, they had made an agreement. If they didn't return to the camp after a month, it would mean they had met with disaster. Qin Tian wondered if Yelin still had the supply list that Jessica had prepared before she left. Yelin confirmed that she did, and Qin Tian asked her to gather the same supplies using the list. Yelin said she would ask someone to prepare them immediately so they would be ready within 2 days. She suggested that they rest and regain their energy before setting off. Qin Tian knew that even the most talented and powerful people were still insignificant in the face of nature. However, the Lada tribe, who lived in the desert, were the best support for this expedition. Although there were over 100 Lada people, the team members were quickly selected. Before their sea training, only a few, like Nick, were considered warriors. Their experience in surviving and hunting in the desert was far superior to others. Their effectiveness came not from their numbers, but from their skills. It would take at least a week to travel from Doranba to Nazer Island, which meant it had been a week since Jessica was confirmed missing. By the time they arrived, another week would have passed. The longer they delayed, the more uncertainties would arise. Fortunately, Jessica was with Kata, so her safety shouldn't have been an issue in the short term. He wished for them to wait for his rescue. To gather the supplies in the shortest time, Yelin mobilized all the resources and connections she had. In less than half the expected time, by the second noon, after they received the news of Jessica's disappearance, Yelin had gathered everything needed for the journey. They soon set out, and Yelin excitedly announced that they would reach the harbor and the sea soon. She mentioned that the fishermen who found the bracelet came from the same harbor where they were headed. Qin Tian vowed to bring Jessica back. Yelin believed that the three of them would surely be reunited. Qin Tian and the others arrived at the harbor of Jonya, where it would take them a week to reach Nazer Island. During that time, Nick led simple training sessions for over 200 soldiers to mentally prepare them for the desert and teach them basic survival skills. A week later, they finally reached the coast of Nazer Island, where the heat was already noticeable. The others couldn't believe they were seeing the island, known to be forbidden. They soon landed ashore, and all Qin Tian could see was sand in every direction. Even though it was winter, the heat felt like a scorching summer midday, despite it being the afternoon. Qin Tian couldn't help but fear the intense heat they would face when the sun rose the next day. Yelin asked if Nick and the others had lived in a similar environment before. Nick confirmed that their homeland was basically the same sand as far as the eye could see. Ragnar exclaimed that the intense heat made him feel like he had returned to his homeland. That night, Qin Tian explained how the temperature difference between day and night in the desert was extreme. While it was unbearably hot during the day, it would become cold at night, making it necessary to start a bonfire. To avoid hypothermia, they needed to wrap their entire bodies and generate more body heat by moving around to keep warm. Qin Tian worried about Ye Lin like a concerned husband. Ye Lin reminded him how the two of them had faced many crises together, but still managed to survive on the deserted island. Now that they had more companions and supplies, she wasn't scared anymore. Qin Tian relied on the others as always, and the Lada people assured him to leave things to them. The next morning, Qin Tian and more than 200 people continued their expedition. Each of them carried a backpack with necessities for surviving in the desert to prevent accidental separation. The food and water supply for the entire team were transported by sleds. Due to time constraints, they had only been able to find a few camels. Otherwise, they could have brought more supplies. After dawn, Qin Tian felt the temperature in the desert rise rapidly. They had already walked an hour away from where Jessica had first set off, but a long journey still lay ahead of them. The glaring sun and the scorching heat made it clear that Nazer Island was not a place suitable for people to live. Not long after the team started, most members were already exhausted. Others began to complain about the heat, which felt like it was cooking them, and they longed to drink water to cool down. They were tempted to remove their robes, but that would have been dangerous and could have led to their deaths. Qin Tian explained that exposing their skin to the burning sunlight would cause sunburn in less than half an hour. The thick robes were effective shields against the sunlight, and taking them off wouldn't make them feel cooler. The robes didn't just block the heat from the sunlight, but also from the arid desert. As the glaring sunlight grew stronger, Nick suggested they wear their goggles. Qin Tian quickly ordered everyone to put on their goggles and reminded them not to remove their robes. The goggles were specially made, and while not as advanced as modern sunglasses, they still provided a layer of protection for their eyes under the intense sunlight. In the desert, the temperature could reach a scorching 50 degrees Celsius during the noon hours. In this situation, if someone buried a raw egg in the sand, it would be cooked in no time. The desert became dangerous around this time, so Qin Tian decided to stop walking. The team took a break and set up sunshade canopies to help them stay cool for a while and catch their breath under the intense heat. Nick also suggested digging pits in the sand. She claimed that digging half a meter deep in the sand and then lying down in it would feel cool. Qin Tian quickly tried it and found it was indeed cool. However, despite feeling refreshed, he felt like someone who was about to be buried. After confirming that digging holes was effective, the soldiers all started digging sand pits. This method of staying cool might have seemed strange, but in the desert, as long as it worked, no one cared if it looked like a grave or not. However, by noon, even with the shade and the cooling effect of the pits, the midday heat still made everyone uncomfortable. They all stopped talking and fell silent. If not for the occasional sounds of drinking water, someone might have mistaken them for a group of dead people lying in a graveyard. The excruciating midday hours finally passed, and by dusk, the desert temperature began to drop. However, after enduring the hellish afternoon, everyone felt drained and listless. For those who hadn't experienced living and surviving in a desert, adapting to its harsh environment in such a short time was difficult. Even Qin Tian complained that it was unbearable without drinking cold water, and felt like he was dying. Ye Lin agreed, saying the whole afternoon felt like days had passed. Nick then mentioned that the sun would set in an hour. Ragnar suggested that everyone needed time to fully adjust to the desert's weather, because if they proceeded with the initial plan and pushed deeper into the desert, it was very likely that someone in the team wouldn't be able to handle the heat and might collapse. Qin Tian quickly agreed with him. At night, the temperature dropped to an extreme level. Qin Tian couldn't believe that a place like Nazer Island could have such a huge difference in temperature between day and night. Ye Lin worried about how Jessica and the others were doing. After experiencing the harsh desert climate, she wondered how Jessica and her team managed to survive. She hoped they still had enough supplies to last until they were rescued. Qin Tian reassured her that they would be all right since Jessica, Keita, and the others were experts in survival. Knowing the desert's climate was terrifyingly abnormal, Qin Tian assumed that Jessica's team wouldn't venture too far, and hoped they were near a route he thought they might be on. However, it would take time for Qin Tian and the others to catch up. Understanding Jessica, he planned to use her route as a guide to search the area around it. They just needed to reach the middle part of the route and then spread out. Ye Lin then noticed a lake on the map along the same route. Qin Tian had been so focused on rescuing Jessica that he hadn't looked at the map carefully. The route had a lake with several patches of greenery around it. He realized it would be better to bring everyone there. With the lake as their target, the team could replenish their water supply, which would help them extend their search time for Jessica and the others in the desert. Nick warned him not to get too excited because the water in the lake might be salty. Ragnar pointed out that not all lakes and deserts were oases. Before they reached the lake, he suggested they shouldn't become too confident and should avoid wasting their current supplies. Qin Tian thought that even if the water was salty, he could still make it drinkable through distillation, but they were already using up their fresh water too quickly. If they wasted too much water before reaching the lake, they might not survive in the desert's hot climate, as the human body needed a lot of water. The next morning, Qin Tian's team continued their journey. After hours of walking, they found a bush along the way. Qin Tian said it was a camel thorn, a shrub made up of hard spikes, and it was very drought-resistant. Though it was common in dry areas, it still needed water to survive. Seeing one on their path meant that the areas ahead likely had more moisture than the places they had passed over the last 2 days. The team soon reached an area with trees and shrubs, and Yelin ordered everyone to rest. To conserve water as much as possible, the leaves on the tree canopy were quite sparse, so they couldn't block out all the sunlight. There were spots of light in the shade, but even so, the shade under a tree was still much cooler than being under a sunshade cloth. Nick instructed everyone to be cautious since scorpions were likely to live in that area. Hearing this, Qin Tian remembered that being stung by a lethal creature in the desert basically meant a death sentence. For everyone's safety, they carefully checked the surrounding area. Within a few dozen square meters, they found about a dozen scorpion holes. The holes were mostly hidden under the cool shade of grass, concealed by the weeds. They were not easily noticeable because they were so small and could easily be overlooked. Concerned, Yelin suggested they look for another place to rest. Qin Tian argued that they could just kill the scorpions. One hole meant one scorpion, and there were dozens of them in the area. Before being surrounded by them, it would be better to kill them off first. Qin Tian noticed Nick and Ragnar excitedly doing something. They said they were trying to catch scorpions. Nick saw that the hole was bigger than usual and assumed the scorpion inside would be fat and juicy. With drool in her mouth, she explained that all Lada people knew how scorpions lived. She said scorpions tasted great when grilled just right. Qin Tian felt anxious because the Lada people in front of him reminded him of a different version of Bear Grylls, whom he and everyone watching knew. Qin Tian wondered if they could really catch the scorpions as he watched Nick dig a small pit in front of a scorpion hole. Nick explained that scorpions would come out of their holes once the temperature dropped, and would fall directly into the pits he had just dug. The pit needed to be right in front of the scorpion's burrow entrance so that the scorpions wouldn't have any other path to take. The pit had to be vertical, so the scorpions wouldn't be able to climb out. The noon temperature was still scorching hot, but luckily they had somewhat gotten used to the weather. With the shade from the trees, they managed to endure until 4 in the afternoon when the temperature finally started to drop, and everyone felt more energized. Ragnar's trap hadn't caught any scorpions since, generally speaking, scorpions only came out in the late afternoon or evening to leave their burrows. Although they hadn't caught any scorpions yet, at least they wouldn't have to worry about the scorpions crawling out and stinging them while they slept. The trees in the area usually formed a clustered community, sharing one root system. If one tree found a water source, the others wouldn't have to worry about dying of thirst. Around the area, there were clusters of 3 or 4 trees, sparsely distributed with gaps of tens of meters. From this, Qin Tian concluded that the underground water in the area was more abundant. This suggested that they were getting closer to the lake. That night, the scorpions sensed the drop in temperature and ventured out in search of food. Unfortunately, they didn't realize that traps awaited them right outside their homes. Everyone watched as the scorpions fell into pits filled with water and celebrated their capture. Qin Tian saw some large, plump, juicy scorpions, but asked everyone to back off and enjoy them themselves. Nick celebrated the big catch, and Qin Tian encouraged them to enjoy the feast. Yelin warned Nick to be careful not to get stung, but Nick casually removed the stinger from the scorpions' tails and told them not to worry. Qin Tian, concerned that scorpions with thicker tails and smaller claws were more poisonous, advised caution when handling them. The captured scorpions had their stingers removed, were skewered on sticks, and placed in front of the bonfire to be grilled. After some time, Nick waved a stick with the cooked scorpions. Yelin suggested they enjoy the meal. Qin Tian noticed the pleasant aroma and decided to try one. After a bite and a few chews, he found that the grilled scorpions tasted like fried grasshoppers. Since they were staying in the desert for a long time, their supplies were limited to dry meat and biscuits, which sacrificed flavor for longer shelf life. Compared to those, roasted scorpions seemed like a treat. Yelin also tried them and agreed they tasted good. Having eaten various insects before, Qin Tian and Yelin no longer considered scorpions a dark cuisine. They enjoyed the taste, but thought it would have been better with some salt. Qin Tian sighed, wishing they had brought some. The next morning, the expedition continued, and some members talked about the man-eating monsters rumored to be on Nazer Island. They also wanted to see the rumored cacti with thorns that they hadn't seen up close. Soon, the team arrived at a lake, and everyone was amazed to find one in the desert. They were eager to jump into the water and take a bath. Qin Tian told them to relax because their journey had been tiring. Without hesitation, everyone removed their robes and clothes and jumped into the water. They felt refreshed after soaking in the cold water and discovered it was also tasty and drinkable. Yelin then told them to set up a camp and prepare dinner so they could rest for the day. Qin Tian took Yelin's hand, and they walked on the water together. Yelin was surprised at how pleasant it was to tread water. Qin Tian now truly appreciated how oases were gifts from nature in such arid places. Everyone enjoyed the cool temperature by the lake. Nick mentioned that she had never seen one as large as this back in their homeland. Although they were desert dwellers and had seen many oases, they were all smaller compared to this one, which looked like a sea to Nick. Qin Tian laughed and pointed out that a sea was not something small. At that moment, the others discovered date palm trees. These trees resembled coconuts, but only in appearance. Being in the desert, a plant like a coconut would need a lot of water to survive. Yelin wondered if the tree was special since a lot of people seemed excited about it. Qin Tian explained that the fruit was edible. These trees could handle high temperatures, waterlogging, drought, salinity, and frost, and they loved sunlight. They thrived in deep, dry, acidic soil and avoided waterlogged areas. Date palms were usually grown from seeds and could grow alone or in clusters with multiple stems from a single root system. They grew slowly until the roots produced fleshy buds. Nick had then started climbing the trees. Yelin asked if the fruits were edible. Nick explained that they could be eaten whether ripe or not. Nick then picked some fruits and threw them to Yelin. Yelin immediately tried them and found the date fruits delicious. Nick said they would be even sweeter if fully ripe. Qin Tian noted that being able to eat such fruits was already a luxury in a desert. Later in the afternoon, Qin Tian, Yelin, and Nick took a dip in the water. Qin Tian felt like he was on vacation with the view in front of him. However, they were startled by the sudden appearance of crocodiles. The others quickly moved to get out of the water. Qin Tian couldn't believe there was a crocodile in the desert. Nick, being a wife and warrior, protected Qin Tian and Yelin. The warriors grabbed their swords and tried to kill the crocodile. However, it fought back and bit one of the members. When the crocodile finally surfaced, Qin Tian couldn't believe he was seeing a real West African crocodile. These crocodiles were smaller and lighter in color compared to Nile crocodiles, with the largest being around 2.5 meters long and mainly feeding on fish, birds, and frogs. Fortunately, the one in the lake was small and not aggressive. Otherwise, it could have performed a death roll after biting someone. Qin Tian then took a sword and quickly stabbed the crocodile's head. The others were shocked that Qin Tian did it in one stab, as they knew the crocodile's head was the hardest part. Meanwhile, Yelin helped treat a member who had been grazed. Qin Tian grabbed a bottle of alcohol and poured it on the wounds of another member who was heavily injured. He told him to endure the pain. Fortunately, Western African crocodiles were not very strong in combat. Even if they bit someone, their teeth didn't reach the bones. As long as the wound was disinfected and properly bandaged, the patient only needed time to rest and recover without worrying about serious outcomes like disability. Qin Tian then asked Nick and Ragnar if they had ever encountered crocodiles in the desert, in any lakes or oases. Nick confirmed that they had never seen crocodiles before. After the crocodile attack, extra guards were added at night to watch over the lake. The guards had a hard time because it was very cold at night in the desert. Since it was nighttime, the animals in the area came out to find food. For example, the desert frog nearby avoided the extreme heat by burrowing deep in the sand during the day and came out at night to search for food. The next morning, Qin Tian woke up feeling refreshed. He hoped he had the eagle with him, as it would have made finding people easier. Yelin said they could still find Jessica and the others without the eagles. Just then, a lot of people surprised Qin Tian by showing him some fish they had just caught from the lake. Qin Tian was shocked to see tilapia in a desert lake. On top of that, the fish were much larger than any he had seen before. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see the next part, comment below.